In this section, we're going to be examining the price elasticity of demand, or the responsiveness of demand to a change in price. But first, let's look at an example. Do people respond to changes in the price of gasoline? Some people argue that people don't vary the quantity of gasoline that they buy as the price changes, that they're going to buy roughly the same amount of gasoline no matter what the price is. Now, think about this for a second. Do you think this is right? Well, let's look at a previous example of something that actually happened in the past. In April 2014, the price of gasoline was $3.60 per gallon. By December 2014, it fell to $2.50 per gallon. So this is a pretty substantial drop in the price. Gasoline consumption only rose by about 7%. So, turns out people do respond to incentives. As you see, when the price of gas became cheaper, people did buy more gasoline. However, how much it changes, how well people respond to incentives, depends on everything around them. So it depends on the prices, the income, the prices of related goods, all these different things, which we're going to explore more in detail in this section. So despite the fact that we saw consumers change the amount of gasoline that they purchased, they didn't appear to change it very much despite the relatively large drop in the price of gasoline. So how can we come up with a sensible way to measure how much a quantity changes when price changes? One idea, a very simple idea, is to look at the slope of the demand curve. But this doesn't exactly work because the value of the slope depends on the units used to measure the axes. So whether you do dollars, hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars, millions of dollars, that will change the slope. So it'll be difficult to compare between different goods. So instead we define a slightly different idea. The same basic concept, but slightly different, called elasticity, which is a measure of how much one economic variable responds to changes in another economic variable. And we'll use percentage changes, so it doesn't matter what unit we're working with. So we'll begin looking at this with the demand side of the market like we did in the previous chapter. So the first elasticity we're going to look at is the price elasticity of demand. What that means is the responsiveness of the quantity demanded of a good or service to a change in the price of that good or service. So here we have a simple formula for you. The price elasticity of demand equals a percent change in the quantity demanded divided by the percent change in price. So although the slope and the price elasticity of demand are related, they're not quite the same thing. Also, it's important to remember that since the price and the quantity change are going to be in the opposite directions on the demand curve, the price elasticity of demand is going to be a negative number. However, we often refer to more negative elasticities as being larger or higher. So imagine this is, like in your math classes, the absolute value. So we're looking at the distance from zero. So if you have an elasticity of -7 versus an elasticity of -2, the -7 is going to be a larger elasticity or more negative elasticity. What does a large value for the price elasticity of demand mean? Basically what it means is that the quantity demanded is going to change a lot in response to a change in the price. So to formally define this, we say that demand is elastic if the price elasticity of demand is larger than 1, or if it's greater than 1. And this is, again, an absolute value. So the number you'll actually get computing it would be, say, -4 or -6. As long as that number is larger than 1, the absolute value of it is larger than 1, then we consider the good elastic. So if there's a 10% increase in price that results in a greater than a 10% decrease in the quantity demanded, we would say that demand for that good is elastic. On the other hand, demand is inelastic if its price elasticity of demand is smaller in absolute value than 1. So that is closer to 0. That will indicate that the quantity demanded changes little in response to a change in price. So again, if there is a 10% increase in price, for an inelastic good, it would experience a less than 10% decrease in the quantity demanded. Demand is also unit elastic if the price elasticity of demand is exactly equal to 1. This is obviously more rare, but there is situations where it is perfectly 1, so it's not elastic or inelastic. The figure on this slide compares a good with an inelastic demand and a good with an elastic demand. So you can see the difference between them visually. So looking at the first demand curve, D1, If you cut the price from $3 to $2.70, the number of gallons of gasoline sold increases from 1,000 per day to 1,200 per day. So at this point, we would say that demand is elastic. We'd say that a change in the price leads to a large change in the quantity demanded. Now, if we compare that to the second demand curve, D2, cutting the price from $3 to $2.70 is going to move along the demand curve from point A to point C. So the number of gallons sold is going to move from 1,000 per day to 1,050 per day. We'd say demand is inelastic for the demand curve D2. Using the demand curve from the previous slide, let's walk through how to calculate the price elasticity of demand. You're not going to have to know how to calculate the price elasticity of demand for an exam, but I think it's helpful to walk through this process to understand how we calculate price elasticity of demand. So looking at the demand curve D1, let's say at your gas station that you own, you decide to cut the price from $2.50 per gallon to $2.30 per gallon. And in response, the gasoline sales increased from 2,000 gallons per day to 2,500 gallons per day. And again, this is shown on demand curve D1, so you're moving from point A to point B. So to calculate the price elasticity of demand, we're first going to need to find the average quantity and the average price. So the average quantity is going to be literally just the average of the two quantities, so 2,000 gallons plus 2,500 gallons divided by 2, which gives us an average quantity of 2,250 gallons. Likewise, we'll calculate the average price, so that'll be $2.50 plus $2.30, our two prices, and then divided by 2. That gives us $2.40. The next step is to calculate the percentage change in the quantity and in the price. So the percentage change in the quantity demanded will be 2,500, the new quantity demanded, minus 2,000, the original quantity demanded, divided by 2,500, or the average quantity demanded, and then times that by 100 to get it in percentage terms. So in this case, 2,500, the new quantity, minus 2,000, the old quantity, divided by 2,250, the average quantity, times 100 will equal 22.2%. Next, we find the percentage change in price. So again, it's the same basic idea. We take the new price, $2.30, and subtract the original price, $2.50, divided by the average price that we found of $2.40. Multiply that times 100, and we get negative 8.3%. So in this case, the price decreased by 8.3%, and the quantity demanded increased by 22%. So now the price elasticity of demand is just the ratio between those two, between the percentage change of the quantity demanded and the percentage change in price. So the price elasticity of demand equals 22.2% divided by negative 8.3%, and that leaves us with negative 2.7 for the price elasticity of demand. Now, because negative 2.7 is greater than the absolute value, negative 1, we would say that the demand in this price range is elastic. So the demand for gasoline with the demand curve D1 is elastic. So as you, the gasoline station owner, decrease your price, you're going to see a greater increase in the quantity demanded. I just want to make a couple notes about elasticity. While the slope and the elasticity are not the same, they are related concepts. So two demand curves go through the same point, like the two demand curves in the previous example. The one with the higher slope also has the higher or the more negative elasticity. A vertical demand curve means that the quantity demanded does not change as the price changes. So in this case, the price elasticity of demand would be 0. You say that a vertical demand curve is perfectly inelastic. If you want to think of some examples, this is very rare in the real world. The only really good examples are things that bodies physically need. So if you think of like insulin for a diabetes patient, they need that insulin in order to survive. So no matter what the price is, they'll be willing to pay. Likewise, for illegal drugs that are addictive, there's also a perfectly inelastic demand for some users who have that physical need, and no matter what the price is, will be willing to purchase those drugs. So just to define perfectly inelastic demand, it is a case where the quantity demanded is completely unresponsive to price, and the price elasticity of demand equals zero. You can also have a horizontal demand curve. A horizontal demand curve means that the quantity demanded is infinitely responsive to price changes. So the elasticity is infinite, it's infinity. A horizontal demand curve is called perfectly elastic. So perfectly elastic demand is a case where the quantity demanded is infinitely responsive to price, and the price elasticity of demand equals infinity. This is another special case that's very rare in the real world. There's very few goods that can fall under this. If you think of an example, maybe think of an agricultural product like wheat, it's very standardized, so no matter where you go, say you get the same wheat and there's a lot of sellers. So if any one seller would try to raise their price, no one would purchase from them, and all the buyers would go and purchase from other farms who sell it at the same lower price. Finally, the last special case that we mentioned before is unit elastic. So that's when a decrease in price results in the same percentage increase in the quantity demanded. So they move one for one with each other. Here's table 6.1, which graphically summarizes the different levels of price elasticity of demand. So for the first figure, the demand is elastic. So the absolute value of price elasticity is greater than 1. And we see that shown on the figure to the right, that a small reduction in price is going to lead to a larger increase in the quantity demanded. So there's a more shallow slope for the demand curve. Next, we see if demand is inelastic. In that case, the absolute value of the price elasticity is less than 1. So in this case, a small increase in price is going to lead to an even smaller decrease in the quantity demanded. So in this case, we see, with the figure on the right, a very steep demand curve. The next section of the chart shows if demand is unit elastic. That means the absolute value of the price elasticity of demand is equal to exactly 1. So if we have an 11% reduction in price, as you see on the figure to the right, there's an 11% increase in the quantity demanded. So the percentages are exactly the same. Again, this is very rare. The next one is perfectly elastic demand, and that's equal to infinity. This is the one where any increase in price causes the quantity demand to decrease to 0. So we end up with a horizontal demand curve. And our final example is the perfectly inelastic demand. In this case, the absolute value of the price elasticity of demand is equal to exactly 0. So if there's any increase or decrease in price, there's going to be no change in the quantity demanded. That no matter what the price is, people are going to demand that good. So now let's return to the question that was posed at the beginning of this lecture. Do people respond to changes in the price of gasoline? We can now use our knowledge to answer this question in economic terms. So demand for gasoline is inelastic. The quantity demanded does not change much as the price of gasoline changes. Now it's not perfectly inelastic. As we saw in the example, there was an increase in the quantity demanded when the price dropped. So it is somewhat responsive to price. So the panel on the left shows a perfectly inelastic demand, where no matter what happens, in this case the price changes, the supply curve shifts, but there is no difference in the quantity demanded. There is no change. As we saw, this was not the case, that demand is inelastic, but there still is some responsiveness to price. So that's shown on the right, the figure on the right side. So as the supply curve shifts to the left, and the price moves from P1, a lower price, to a higher price, we see the quantity demanded fall. So there is a change in the quantity demanded, although it is much smaller in percentage terms than the percentage change in price. For most of you working in the business world, you don't need to know how to calculate the price elasticity of demand. That's not really something that's going to help your business be successful. But understanding the price elasticity of demand, understanding how responsive individuals are to a change in price is very important, especially if you're involved in determining the price of goods or services, or whether you want to run sales, or whether you think you need a price increase. So it's this basic concept that I think is important for us to understand. So there are several characteristics of goods, of markets, and other things that determine the responsiveness of individuals to the price of goods. So let's look at a few of these. The first is the availability of close substitutes. If a product has more substitutes available, it will have more elastic demand. So let's look at an example. There are few substitutes for gasoline, especially in the short run, so the price elasticity of demand is low. Now, in the longer term, there may be more substitutes. So in the long run, people are more responsive to changes in price. So if the price of gas increases for a long period of time, people may switch to buying electric cars. They may take the bus to work. They may move closer to work so they can walk. But in the short run, if you have to drive a half hour to get to St. Francis every day, you don't have a lot of other options. So you're still going to consume gasoline. Another example, there are many substitutes for Nikes. There's a lot of other sneakers you can buy out there, a lot of other brands, Reeboks, Adidas's, New Balances, what have you. So the price elasticity of demand is pretty high. If there's a change in the price of Nikes, people will respond to that by buying more Reeboks and more Adidas's, more New Balances, or they'll buy less of those if Nike drops their price. Because there's a lot of alternatives, they can go elsewhere. Next is the passage of time. So over time, people can adjust their buying habits more easily. So elasticity is higher in the long run than it is in the short run. So like I mentioned in the gasoline example, if the price of gasoline rises, it takes a while for people to adjust their gasoline consumption. So there's several ways they can do that. They can move close to work, they can buy a more fuel-efficient car, they can walk or bike, they can use public transportation. They can buy, just electric cars, so they don't have to use any gasoline now. So there's a lot of different ways in the long run. But in the short run, like I said, there aren't a lot of choices. The next is whether the good is a luxury or necessity. So people are more flexible with luxuries than they are with necessities. So the price elasticity of demand is going to be higher for luxuries. So a lot of people consider milk and bread necessities. So they'll buy them every week, no matter what the price is. On the other hand, things that they consider luxury, so maybe like really expensive cuts of steak, if the price increases, they may be less willing to purchase that because it's something special they're doing. It's not something that they consider need day in and day out. The next determinant is the definition of the market. So the more narrowly you define a market, the more substitutes are available, hence the more elastic the demand is. So, for instance, there may not be good substitutes for jeans. You may not see another type of clothing that is a good substitute for jeans, that can do everything that jeans do. So your demand for jeans may be very inelastic. But if you narrow and define the market more narrowly and consider the market based on brand of jeans, you may be more sensitive to price of a particular brand. So if Wrangler increases their prices, you may be much more willing to purchase from Levi's or from a different brand. You're still staying within jeans, so the demand for jeans itself is relatively inelastic, but within the brands, it's much more elastic. So how narrowly you define a brand determines just how elastic it is. And the final determinant of the price elasticity of demand is the share of a good in a consumer's budget. So if a good is a small portion of your budget, you will not likely be very sensitive to price. So if you buy table salt once a year, and table salt is very cheap, it's 0.0001% of your budget, changes in its price, even if it doubles, isn't going to affect how much you buy. It's not going to be a big deal for you relative to your entire income. Whereas if the price of a larger purchase, so say a car, is a much larger portion of your income, if that price of cars double, then you'll be much more likely to wait to buy a car. You'll put it off because of how much more expensive it is. So you'll be more sensitive to the price of a more expensive good.